All right, artists, welcome back. Last week I had you do two projects, or a choice of two projects, shading two-dimensional flat shapes and turning them into three-dimensional forms that look like they actually exist in space and they're not just flat on the paper. And then I had you take the project to the next level and challenge yourself by shading a water droplet or lots of water droplets. And you didn't think that project was going to stop there, did you? We are actually going to take the basic principles of that water droplet. If you look closely, this iris and pupil could basically look like a water droplet with eyelids added, and we're going to turn that into a human eye. Now, we're going to start sort of the same way. I want you to take something round. It could be a can of food or the bottom of a cup. We're going to make this eye pretty big because, again, it's going to be easier to shade if we draw something that's a little bit larger. You're going to trace a circle. Now, I want you to trace gently because we're not going to end up using the entire circle. Before we get started shading, I do want us to put a guideline in there. Right smack dab in the middle, a much, much smaller circle, sort of the diameter of the bottom of your pencil. And just to make sure that you know what's going on, go ahead, shade that in really nice and dark. This is going to be shaded as dark as your pencil goes. Now I'm using a pretty dark pencil. Just push as hard as you can. And then up in the right corner, sort of like we did with the water droplet, I want you to carve out the brightest white spot on your iris, on your eye. This is where there's not going to be any shading. It's going to stay bright white because it is where the light is reflecting off of our model's eye. We're not going to start shading just yet because I want to make sure that we draw in the eyelids so that we don't waste any extra work. This is going to be an almond shape, or sort of like a leaf. Basically, what I want you to do is put a dot here on the left. If you want to imagine and very lightly draw a triangle from here, from the dot to the top of the circle, and from the dot to the bottom of the circle, that's cool. In fact, you could draw a very light line through the pupil to the other side and put a dot here. I'll draw those a little darker so you can see them, but I want you to draw them very light. Do you see how I'm making a triangle from the dot to the top and the dot to the bottom? Now that doesn't look exactly like an eyelid because our eyelids are not straight lines, they are curved lines, but this is just going to help us provide a guideline for our almond shape or our leaf shape. I want you to notice at the top of the eye that the arc, the curve, this rainbow shape, actually cuts off the top of our circle. Our circle would go all the way up here, but the eyelid actually, if you look at anyone's eye, the top eyelid comes down over that colorful part, that blue, green, brown, whatever color eyes you have, it sort of covers up that top part. Otherwise, it looks like our model's eyes are wide open. Okay, usually when you go throughout the day, the eyelid comes down partly on top of the iris. So what I want you to do is draw an arc, a wide arc from one dot to the other dot, cutting off the top of that circle. You see how I've got rid of part of that circle? In fact, go ahead and erase it. Get rid of it. If it looks like these two dots are too far apart, I'm not going to be afraid to move them in a little bit. If we get them too far apart, our eye is going to look like it's squinting and angry. Or even that it belongs to an animal, like a wolf. And that's okay. In fact, that's pretty cool. But if we're trying to draw a human eye, we don't want these two dots to be too far apart. I'm going to draw another arc that is basically mirroring the top arc, like I'm flipping it over to the bottom. Except this time I'm not going to cut off as much of the circle. In fact, I might not cut off any of the circle at all. So I'm going to draw an arc from this all the way skirting right along the edge of the circle. And notice what I did right here at the end. Rather than going straight there, I took a little bit of a detour and I curved together. There's this little thing right here, and I should probably look up what it's called. But it sort of occupies this little corner of our eye. And in fact, when we're shading, it's going to get pretty dark towards the edges and the corners of our eye. I like how this looks, and I'm actually going to start shading inside the iris. But first, I'm going to draw another fold of skin, another line at the top here, and then a couple at the bottom. Notice that they don't go all the way to the dot. There's just a little bit of space here. And basically, because we open and close our eyes, because we blink our eyes a lot, we develop creases that allow our eyelids to close. And so we're drawing those creases here to make our eyes look more realistic. So let's go ahead and start at the inside of our iris. That's the large round circle, the colorful part. And what I want you to do is, you've already shaded the pupil, this part that we see from, very, very dark as your pencil goes. What I want you to do is draw another light circle around the pupil, and we're going to shade that in light gray. And then we're going to leave a space that's white or not shaded very dark at all. And we're going to go around the edge of the iris, that big circle. And we're going to color pretty dark. Almost as dark as the pupil. Not quite, but almost. In order to get something darker, you just press with a little more pressure from your wrist and your fingers and your arm. You can turn the paper, keep turning the paper to make it easier to shade. I've got mine kind of locked in right here, so I'm just sort of adjusting my arm and turning my arm. But notice that I'm taking my lines in a curved motion around the edges of the circle. And then as I get towards the pupil, I release the pressure in my fingers, my wrists, my hand, and it gets lighter and lighter. Now remember, I'm never going to shade this highlight, okay? When I shade, I go around the highlight and I leave it that bright white color. Okay? So notice that it's going from dark to light. And if I want to take my eraser now and go back through and just give myself a little more white, that's looking pretty realistic to me. We cannot leave these sides of the eye bright white, because actually the entire eyeball, you can only see part of it, but the entire eyeball is round as well. And so around the edges, it gets pretty dark. Okay, don't be afraid to go too dark. In fact, I've seen some of you start to experiment with drawing human eyes and animal eyes, and they look great. But one of the main things the beginning artists do that keep it from looking super realistic is they just don't allow themselves to go dark enough. Typically, in order to make something look realistic, we need to make sure that we have a highlight, a bright white spot, and then don't be afraid to push the rest of the drawing dark. So I'm going to like this nice medium gray in there, but along the edges, I'm going to press nice and hard, nice and dark. That is starting to look pretty realistic. I'm going to take my eraser and lighten it up a little bit. Not that light, but a little bit. And now I'm ready to add some eyelashes. Now the eyelashes are tricky, right? Because if we articulate them too much, if we draw them just one at a time, it's going to look a little bit silly. And there are also a lot of eyelashes. So you're going to be making this motion. Luckily, you can practice it on another page, and you are going to make like 100 of them. So even if some of them don't turn out well, you have time to try again and again and again. The trick is you want to start pressing hard right on the edge of the curve of the upper eyelid, and then release the pressure as you flick your wrist. You literally need to go like this motion over and over and over and over again, okay? So I'm flicking the wrist, and I am putting them right next to each other. If the eyelash is too thick, it won't look realistic. Notice that I curve this way, and then as I get to the top of the eyelash, it starts to get straight, and then as I go to the other side of the eye, the eyelashes get smaller, and they start curving the other way. Now, it looks pretty good. I like how that looks. I'm gonna make it a little bit darker near the base just by shading. Okay, don't forget about that crease that's behind the eyelashes. You're gonna start making that dark. And all of this contributes to making it look more realistic. Anytime that you have a very dark line standing alone on a white background, it keeps the eye and it keeps the face from looking super realistic. So go ahead and add a general medium gray tone around the eye. It doesn't really matter how far out you go. You probably guessed by this point that since we have some extra time together, in these next couple of weeks, I am going to be showing you how to make all the elements of a face: eyes, nose, mouth, and then hopefully at some point we can start putting them together. This is something that I don't usually teach until middle school or high school, but I think you can handle it. And we've got some time to practice and experiment making our faces look realistic. I'm gonna go ahead and shade in a little bit darker on the bottom crease. And then I fade out. I've got one more crease here that I need to take care of. Notice that when I shade, I pick a spot and I start shading in one direction. I need to make this part of the eye a little bit darker. Notice I'm almost always talking about making something darker and not lighter. It's so much easier to make something lighter because if I decide that I wanted to go back and make a highlight, I can just erase, right? If I want to make this lighter, if I want to add a spot that doesn't have shading, I can just go through with my pencil, but in general, I just need to keep layering and layering shading. I like how this looks, but I'm not super happy with how the eye looks. I think it might be too light, yet again, in the middle. So let me go ahead and add some sort of starburst marks. And the way that I'm gonna do this is rather than going around shading in a circle like this, I'm actually going to be making lines that are coming from the edge of the circle and pointing toward that dark pupil in the middle of the eye. That looks pretty cool to me. Notice that I'm going all the way around. When I hit that highlight, I stop. Do not draw on top of the highlight. If I accidentally did, it's not the end of the world because I could go back with my eraser and erase. But when I have it looking like that, I'm going to go back through and do the same thing from the pupil, pointing towards the outside edge of the circle. Again, I'm just adding layers and layers of dark. They can touch, they can connect, or you can leave a little bit of this halo right here. That looks pretty cool. You can always go through with your finger and smooth some stuff out. Don't smooth it out too much, but you see how it makes your finger look kind of shiny and metallic? I really like how this looks. Now you notice that I drew these two eyes both this morning. I like this one a little bit better than that one, but they both look realistic. So if yours doesn't look exactly like mine, don't worry. There are billions of people in this world and we all have different shaped eyes, different colored eyes, eyes that look differently. And so if yours is a little bit different than mine, I bet that it matches somebody's eyes that's out there in the world. So you should be proud of what you did. And of course, as always, I would love to see the end product. You can either email it to me, hang on to it, and I'll look at it when we join each other again next year, or you can give it to your teacher to share with me on Seesaw, how you've been accessing all of your assignments. And if you have any questions or any problems or want me to help you, just send me an email and ask me, and I'll be happy to give you some feedback. Thanks so much for sticking with me, and I will talk to you soon.